Woodrow Wilson stands alone among American presidents as the only one to hold an earned doctorate, a man who moved directly from the lecture hall to the Oval Office, born in the shadow of the Civil War, shaped by Presbyterian piety and Southern defeat. Wilson rose through academia with a brilliant mind and unyielding moral conviction. He became president of Princeton, governor of New Jersey, and finally the 28th president of the United States, a journey that carried ideas forged in classrooms into the crucible of world power. This book traces the remarkable arc from a frail boy who learned to read late yet mastered language with extraordinary precision, to a visionary leader who sought to remake both America and the world according to principles of moral order, guided progress, and democratic idealism. Wilson was a professor-president in the deepest sense. His speeches rang with biblical cadence. His policies drew from historical scholarship. His vision of leadership rested on the belief that the executive must educate and elevate public opinion toward a higher purpose. He saw government not as mere administration but as ethical drama, with America destined by providence to champion liberty and justice. Yet Wilson's story is one of profound contradictions. He expanded federal power to curb corporate monopolies, created the Federal Reserve, championed labor rights, and laid the foundations for modern administrative governance, all while advancing progressive taxation and antitrust enforcement that reshaped economic fairness. He led America into World War I with the soaring declaration that the world must be made safe for democracy, then offered the 14 points as a liberal blueprint for lasting peace, founding the League of Nations and the very idea of collective security that would birth the United Nations. At the same time, Wilson carried the racial prejudices of his Southern upbringing into the White House. He permitted resegregation of federal offices, demoted black employees, and endorsed the racist film Birth of a Nation in a White House screening. His moral absolutism could harden into inflexibility, turning compromise into betrayal and dissent into disloyalty. The stroke that crippled him in 1919 amid his desperate fight for the League left him impaired yet unyielding, contributing to the treaty's Senate defeat and America's retreat from global leadership. This biography follows Wilson's life chronologically, chapter by chapter, from childhood roots through academic triumphs, political ascent, presidential reforms, wartime leadership, peacemaking dreams, and final collapse. It draws on his own words, letters, diaries, speeches, as well as contemporary accounts and modern scholarship to present a full portrait. The visionary whose ideas changed the world, and the flawed man whose blind spots inflicted lasting harm. Wilson's legacy remains fiercely debated. He modernized the presidency, expanded executive authority, and planted seeds of international cooperation that endure today. Yet the punitive Versailles terms, racial policies, and suppression of civil liberties during wartime cast long shadows. In an era of renewed debate over America's global role, executive power, and democratic ideals, Wilson's story speaks with urgent relevance. He believed history moved toward moral progress under enlightened leadership. Whether that faith was triumph or tragedy depends on how we weigh his achievements against his failures. This is the story of a scholar who became president and in doing so, sought to teach the nation and the world a new way forward. Chapter 1: A Scholar is Born. Childhood and Southern Roots. Thomas Woodrow Wilson entered the world on December 28, 1856, in a modest Presbyterian manse in Staunton, Virginia. He was the third of 4 children born to Joseph Ruggles Wilson, a stern yet deeply affectionate minister and theologian of Scotch-Irish descent, and Jessie Woodrow Wilson, whose Scottish lineage had produced generations of clergymen. The household breathed piety, discipline, and intellectual fervor. From his earliest days, young Tommy absorbed the rhythms of sermon preparation, Bible study, and moral instruction that would shape his eloquence and lifelong sense of divine purpose. Joseph Wilson, with his commanding voice and exacting standards, instilled in his son the conviction that words were sacred instruments for truth and persuasion. Jessie, quieter but equally devout, offered emotional warmth and artistic sensitivity that softened the home's rigor. In 1858, the family moved to Augusta, Georgia, where Joseph accepted a pastorate at the First Presbyterian Church. It was here, in the heart of the antebellum South, that Tommy spent his formative childhood years. The Wilsons lived comfortably in a brick house on Telfair Street, surrounded by magnolias and a gentle cadence of Southern life, lazy afternoons, church socials, and a distant hum of cotton commerce. Yet tranquility was shattered in 1861. With the outbreak of the Civil War, Augusta became a Confederate hub. Arsenals, hospitals, and powder works sprang up overnight. Tommy, not yet 5, watched soldiers drill in the streets and heard cannon fire from distant battlefields. His father's church was converted into a hospital. The boy saw wounded men carried in on stretchers and prisoners guarded in the yard. Later, he vividly recalled seeing Jefferson Davis, the captured Confederate president, paraded through town in chains, and Robert E. Lee riding silently past after Appomattox. These images of defeat and dignity etched themselves deeply, fostering a lifelong sympathy for the South's lost cause, and a belief in resilience through suffering, a theme that would echo in his later speeches about national purpose. Emerging from trial, the war's end brought Reconstruction's turmoil. Federal troops occupied Augusta. Carpetbaggers and freedmen reshaped society in ways the Wilsons found alien and threatening. The Wilson household, staunchly Presbyterian and pro-Confederate, viewed these changes with quiet disapproval rooted in both religious conviction and regional loyalty. Joseph Wilson served briefly as a chaplain to troops and helped found the Southern Presbyterian Church, separating from Northern brethren over slavery and states' rights. Tommy absorbed his father's convictions. Government should rest on moral foundations. Change must come organically rather than by force, and leadership required educated guidance from those attuned to divine will. These ideas, organic evolution, moral absolutism, providential history, would become cornerstones of Wilson's political philosophy. Blending conservative restraint with progressive ambition, education in the Wilson home was rigorous and oral, reflecting Joseph's belief that true learning came through spoken mastery. Likely dyslexic, a condition undiagnosed in the 19th century, Tommy did not read fluently until age 10 or 11, struggling with written words while excelling in memory and speech. His father compensated with intensive drills, dictating passages for the boy to write in shorthand, demanding precise pronunciation, and critiquing mock sermons delivered from a makeshift pulpit. These exercises forged Wilson's extraordinary command of language. His later speeches would flow with biblical cadence and rhetorical power. Books were sacred, play was secondary. Frail health kept him from rough games, so he immersed himself in Walter Scott's novels, British histories, and parliamentary debates. He staged imaginary sessions of the British House of Commons in the backyard, drafting constitutions for make-believe clubs and practicing the art of persuasion. That would define his career. In 1870, the family relocated to Wilmington, North Carolina, where Joseph taught at a seminary. At 17, Tommy entered Davidson College, a small Presbyterian school, but illness forced withdrawal after 1 year. He recovered at home, reading voraciously history, politics, poetry, and dreaming of public service as a statesman orator. In 1875, he enrolled at the College of New Jersey, later Princeton, chosen for its Presbyterian ties and intellectual reputation. There, amid Gothic halls and debating societies, he found his true home. He graduated in 1879, having honed oratorical skills, published essays on government reform, and developed a passion for constitutional government modeled on British responsibility. Wilson's Southern and Presbyterian roots ran deep, shaping his worldview in profound ways. They instilled moral absolutism, a belief in providence guiding history, and a rhetorical style steeped in biblical cadence. They also carried the era's racial attitudes. The Wilson household accepted white supremacy as natural, viewing Reconstruction as a tragic overreach that disrupted organic social order. These early influences, defeat, discipline, duty, and a sense of divine mission, propelled Tommy Wilson toward a singular destiny. the only American president to earn a doctorate, a scholar whose ideas would reshape the nation and the world for better and worse. Chapter 2, Books Over Playgrounds, The Making of a Thinker. Woodrow Wilson's childhood prioritized intellect over physical exertion, a pattern set by delicate health and a bookish temperament that kept him indoors more often than on playgrounds. His father's rigorous training turned every conversation into a lesson in clarity and persuasion. Joseph Wilson would read passages aloud from the Bible or classical texts and demand that Tommy repeat them verbatim, correcting every hesitation or mispronunciation. These drills, though demanding and sometimes tearful, gifted the boy a lifelong mastery of spoken and written English sentences crafted with precision, rhythm, and moral weight. Tommy learned early that language was power, a tool for shaping minds and moving hearts. At Princeton 1875 to 1879, Wilson blossomed intellectually and socially. He joined the American Whig Society, a premier debating club rivaling Clio Hall, and devoured works by Edmund Burke, Walter Bagehot, and Thomas Babington Macaulay. He admired Britain's parliamentary system, where a strong cabinet provided unified leadership and clear responsibility, something he found lacking in America's fragmented Congress, dominated by committees. As editor of the Princetonian, he published sharp critiques of congressional committee rules and dreamed of a more responsible government led by eloquent statesmen who could interpret and guide public opinion. His essays revealed early ambition. He signed anonymous articles with pseudonyms like a Princetonian, already imagining national influence and signing his letters with flourish. Graduating in 1879, Wilson briefly pursued law at the University of Virginia 1879 to 1881, drawn by its association with Jeffersonian ideals. He excelled in constitutional studies and joined the Jefferson Literary Society, honing oratorical skills through heated debates on current issues. Yet the mundane realities of legal practice in Atlanta 1882 to 1883 disillusioned him deeply. Petty client disputes over land and debts clashed with his grand visions of public service. As a moral crusade, health issues, chronic digestive problems, headaches, and nervous exhaustion forced retreat to his parents' home, where he reflected on his true calling, scholarship and reform rather than courtroom advocacy. During recovery, Wilson undertook intensive self-study in history and political economy, reading voraciously in his father's library and beyond. He read deeply in German historicism and British constitutional theory, concluding that institutions evolve organically, like living organisms, from historical seeds rather than rational design. This evolutionary view shaped his later rejection of radical change in favor of guided progress. In 1883, he entered Johns Hopkins University, America's first research-oriented graduate program modeled on German seminaries. Under Herbert Baxter Adams, he embraced the germ theory of government. Institutions grow from historical origins, requiring careful nurturing by educated leaders. His doctoral dissertation, Congressional Government, a Study in American Politics 1885, became an instant classic that launched his scholarly reputation. Published widely in 1885, it dissected Congress's dominance through standing committees, arguing that fragmented power obscured responsibility and prevented coherent national policy. Wilson called for stronger presidential and party leadership, modeled on British practices where the executive must maintain parliamentary confidence. The book earned widespread acclaim from figures like James Bryce and Gamaliel Bradford, establishing him as a rising intellectual star critiquing American democracy's flaws. Throughout these years, Wilson's thinking matured into a coherent philosophy. He rejected radical change, favoring guided evolution led by educated elites who understood historical forces. Presbyterian morality infused his work. Politics was a moral enterprise requiring character, vision, and divine guidance. He married Ellen Louise Axon in 1885, a cultivated artist from a ministerial family who became his emotional anchor and intellectual confidant. Their partnership provided stability amid frequent health struggles, with Ellen offering quiet encouragement for his ambitions and sharing literary tastes. By his late 20s, Wilson had transformed from a frail Southern boy into a disciplined thinker with a clear mission: to reform American government through ideas grounded in history and morality. His critique of congressional tyranny foreshadowed his later push for presidential leadership. Books, not playgrounds, had forged him, turning personal limitations into intellectual strengths and preparing him for an academic career that would soon propel him onto a national stage where theory could meet power. Chapter 3: Princeton Dreams, Education and Intellectual Awakening. Returning to Princeton as a student in 1875 ignited Woodrow Wilson's lifelong passion for the institution. Amid ivy-covered Gothic buildings and lively debating halls, he found an intellectual home that matched his ambitions. He changed his name from Tommy to Woodrow, signaling maturity, and immersed himself in campus life, forming friendships that lasted decades and discovering a community where ideas mattered. More than pedigree. As an undergraduate, Wilson shone in oratory and writing. He led the Liberal Debating Committee, drafted model constitutions for student societies, and published essays advocating stronger executive leadership to overcome congressional chaos. His senior thesis analyzed the British cabinet system in detail, arguing that America needed similar cohesion to clarify responsibility and enable decisive action. Graduation in 1879 left him nostalgic. Princeton became his ideal of educated citizenship, a place where character and intellect served democracy rather than mere social privilege. Law practice proved unsatisfying, so Wilson turned to academia. He taught briefly at Bryn Mawr and Wesleyan, before Princeton summoned him back in 1890 as professor of jurisprudence and political economy. At age 34, he returned triumphantly to the campus that had awakened his dreams, greeted with enthusiasm by students who remembered his undergraduate brilliance and faculty who recognized his rising scholarly stature. Wilson's lectures electrified students, delivered without notes. They blended vivid storytelling with moral insight and philosophical depth. He portrayed history as a dramatic struggle toward ordered liberty, guided by providence and human will. Crowds overflowed. His classroom, students called him the Great Wilson and hung on his every phrase. His courses on comparative government and administration introduced innovative methods, primary sources, critical discussion, and real-world application that anticipated modern teaching and inspired generations. He published prolifically during this fertile period. The State 1889 offered a systematic overview of government forms, emphasizing historical evolution and becoming a standard textbook used nationwide. Essays in Atlantic Monthly and Political Science Quarterly reached national audiences, establishing him as a public intellectual. Wilson lectured across the country, earning fame as America's foremost young political scholar and commanding fees that supplemented his salary and supported family comforts. This period marked his full intellectual awakening, influenced by progressive thought sweeping the Gilded Age. He began critiquing unchecked corporate privilege and social inequality. Education, he believed, should cultivate public spirit and moral character, not merely social polish or vocational skills. Princeton's clubby atmosphere, dominated by exclusive eating clubs that prioritized wealth and connections, frustrated him deeply. He dreamed of transforming it into a true meritocracy where serious study trumped fraternity and family legacy, preparing leaders for democratic service. Personally, life stabilized beautifully. Ellen bore 3 daughters, Margaret, Jessie, and Eleanor, creating a loving home in Princeton town filled with music, art, and reading aloud. The family enjoyed simple pleasures, walks along campus, paths, artistic pursuits with Ellen's painting, and summers at Lake George, offering respite from health issues. Yet ambition stirred beneath contentment. Wilson confided to diaries his desire for a larger influence, perhaps even political office, though he dismissed it as vanity. Conflicting with his scholarly calling. By the late 1890s, Wilson stood at academia's pinnacle. His 1896 biography of George Washington portrayed the founder as a principled leader, embodying virtue amid chaos. and contributions to multi-volume histories cemented his reputation as a literary historian. Princeton represented his deepest dreams, disciplined intellect serving democracy's higher purpose. The institution had awakened him, now he would seek to awaken it fully, setting the stage for administrative battles that would launch him beyond campus walls into power's unforgiving arena. Chapter 4: The Classroom Reformer, Wilson the Professor. From 1890 to 1902, Woodrow Wilson reigned as Princeton's most celebrated professor, a period of intellectual dominance that established him as one of America's leading public scholars. His lectures on history, law, and politics drew standing room crowds that spilled into hallways. Delivered with theatrical flair pacing the platform, voice rising and falling like a preacher's, eyes flashing with conviction, he made dry subjects vivid and alive. Students hung on his moral framing. Government was not mere mechanics but ethical drama, with leaders bearing providential responsibility to guide society toward a higher purpose. The object of education, he often said, is not merely to stuff the mind with facts, but to train it to think and to feel rightly. Wilson wrote prodigiously during these years, producing works that blended scholarship with literary grace. Division and Reunion 1893 offered a balanced analysis of the Civil War era, reflecting his Southern roots while acknowledging the necessity of national healing. His admiring biography George Washington 1896 portrayed the founder as a principled leader embodying virtue amid chaos, a model for the disciplined statesmanship Wilson prized. The 5-volume History of the American People 1902, lavishly illustrated and written in flowing prose, became a bestseller for its narrative power, though later generations criticized its Southern biases on race and Reconstruction views that mirrored the era's prevailing white supremacist historiography and Wilson's own upbringing. As an educator, Wilson innovated boldly. He emphasized primary documents over rote textbooks and pioneered small group preceptorial discussions ideas he would later institutionalize as president. He mentored promising students individually, many destined for prominence in law, diplomacy, and politics, instilling in them his vision of public service as a moral vocation. "I want to teach men to think for themselves," he told colleagues, "and to act with responsibility." Yet conservative social views surfaced unmistakably. Raised in the South, Wilson accepted segregation as a natural order and expressed discomfort with mass immigration, fearing dilution of Anglo-Saxon traditions that he believed underpinned American institutions. These attitudes, common among progressive intellectuals of his era who embraced eugenics and racial hierarchy, would later haunt his presidency when translated into federal policy, revealing the tragic blind spots in his moral vision. Wilson pushed curricular reform relentlessly, seeking to elevate academic rigor over social frivolity. He criticized the dominance of exclusive eating clubs, believing they distracted from study and fostered elitism incompatible with democratic ideals. His vision, Princeton as an intellectual powerhouse training public servants, not merely gentlemen for club life and business. The university must be a place where men learn to serve the nation, he declared in faculty meetings. National fame grew steadily. He lectured at Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and Columbia, commanding high fees that allowed family comforts and travel. Universities courted him repeatedly. He declined offers to remain at Princeton, loyal to the institution that nurtured him and where he felt a providential calling. In 1901, he suffered a minor stroke, early warning of vascular issues, but recovered quickly, attributing his survival to divine purpose and resuming work with renewed intensity. By 1902, Wilson stood unrivaled in American political science. His classroom reforms influenced progressive education nationwide, emphasizing critical thinking, moral development, and practical application. Students idolized him as mentor and oracle. Alumni revered him as Princeton's brightest light. When trustees sought a new president to modernize the university amid growing competition from Harvard and Yale, they turned unanimously to their star professor, the first layman chosen for the role, signaling a shift from clerical to scholarly leadership. Wilson's professorial decade transformed Princeton's academic culture, while establishing him as a public intellectual whose ideas reached far beyond campus. The classroom had been his laboratory for testing theories on leadership, reform, and moral governance. Now administration would test his reformers' zeal on a grander scale, revealing both visionary strengths and the rigidity that would define his later battles. Chapter 5, Ideas into Action. Political philosophy takes shape. Woodrow Wilson's scholarship evolved from detached analysis to passionate activism during the 1890s, a maturation that fused historical insight with moral urgency. Influenced profoundly by Walter Bagehot's *The English Constitution*, he admired Britain's cabinet system for unifying executive and legislative power under clear responsibility. America's separation of powers, he argued, produced paralysis and irresponsibility, with Congress hiding behind anonymous committees while the president lacked tools to lead. His seminal Congressional Government 1885 had indicted congressional committee rule as government by the chairman of standing committees, where public opinion could not hold fragmented power accountable. The solution lay in stronger presidential leadership and disciplined parties enabling coherent national policy. By the 1890s, Wilson extended this critique in lectures and essays, warning that unchecked legislative dominance stifled progress and invited corruption. Adapting Darwinian ideas then popular in the social sciences, Wilson viewed society as an evolving organism. Change must be gradual and guided, not revolutionary or abrupt. To avoid chaos, government should intervene to ensure fair competition, regulating monopolies, while preserving individual opportunity against concentrated wealth. He rejected socialism as destructive but embraced progressive reform led by educated elites, who understood historical development and moral imperatives. By the mid-1890s, Wilson's philosophy matured into a coherent worldview. He reconciled tradition with progress. Organic development required deliberate steering by enlightened leaders attuned to providence. The state existed for moral ends, promoting common welfare through expert administration and ethical governance. The object of government, he wrote, is not merely to protect rights, but to enable men to fulfill duties. Lectures and essays articulated this vision with increasing boldness. In Leaderless Government 1897, he warned against congressional tyranny stifling national purpose. The Interpreter of the Nation 1900 cast the president as tribune of the people, articulating national will above partisan fray and educating public opinion toward higher ideals. These pieces revealed Wilson's growing conviction that America needed a strong executive to navigate industrial age challenges. Wilson's thought blended Presbyterian moralism with pragmatic reform. Politics demanded character. Leaders must educate public opinion toward higher ideals while respecting historical continuity. He criticized both laissez-faire conservatism, which ignored social inequities, and radical populism, which risked mob rule and instability. Personal crises sharpened his views. Frequent health scares, digestive troubles, headaches, minor strokes reinforced his sense of providential mission. He often spoke of duty as a divine calling that transcended personal comfort. Ellen's steady support allowed intense focus on writing and teaching. Their correspondence reveals a deep partnership, with her offering critiques and encouragement. By the century's turn, Wilson's ideas were poised for action. His new freedom philosophy, individual liberty protected by active government against concentrated power, would later define his presidency. Contrasting Roosevelt's regulatory new nationalism, the scholar had become a philosopher-activist, ready to translate theory into power when opportunity arose, believing America's destiny required moral leadership guided by historical wisdom. Chapter 6, From Academia to Power. Becoming Princeton's president. In June 1902, Princeton's Board of Trustees faced a pivotal choice: modernize the university or stagnate as an elite social club amid rising competition. They turned unanimously to Woodrow Wilson, their celebrated professor, electing him the institution's 13th president, the first layman in that role. Breaking centuries of clerical tradition, At 45, Wilson accepted with visionary zeal, seeing the post as a divine platform to reshape higher education according to his ideals of merit, intellect, and public service. Wilson's inauguration speech outlined bold ambitions to transform Princeton from a gentleman's finishing school into a rigorous intellectual center rivaling Oxford and Cambridge. He decried the dominance of exclusive eating clubs, which fostered snobbery over scholarship and divided students by wealth. Instead, he championed meritocracy admissions and advancement, based on ability, not family connections or social status. Early reforms met enthusiastic support from faculty and many students. Wilson raised entrance requirements sharply, weeding out unprepared legacies. He recruited stellar faculty, luring luminaries like mathematician Henry Bouchard Fine and historian Bliss Perry with higher salaries and research freedom. The graduate school expanded rapidly. Science departments gained new laboratories. Most innovatively, Wilson introduced the preceptorial system in 1905. 50 young preceptors, fresh PhDs, from top universities led small group tutorials, fostering critical thinking and close student-faculty bonds that revolutionized undergraduate education. Students raved about the intimacy, applications soared. Fundraising flourished under Wilson's eloquent appeals. He charmed donors with speeches linking Princeton's mission to national service and democratic leadership. Millionaire gifts from figures like Moses Taylor Pine funded Gothic quadrangles and beautified the campus, aligning with his romantic ideal of collegiate life as a moral community. Enrollment grew. Princeton's national reputation rose dramatically. Alumni magazines hailed him as a savior. Students cheered his speeches with fervor. Yet beneath success simmered tensions that foreshadowed conflict. Wilson's Presbyterian moralism drove him. He viewed education as character building for democratic leadership, not mere credentialing. He personalized opposition, seeing critics as selfish obstructors of progress rather than legitimate dissenters. Health issues persisted. A 1906 retinal hemorrhage temporarily blinded one eye, forcing convalescence abroad, where he reflected on mission and read British histories for inspiration. Personally, family life anchored him amid demands. Ellen managed household and social duties gracefully, hosting faculty dinners that built alliances and softened Wilson's intensity. Daughters grew into accomplished young women: Margaret artistic, Jessie intellectual, Eleanor spirited. Summers in England refreshed his Anglophile soul and strengthened transatlantic ties. By 1907, Wilson stood at his presidency's zenith. Princeton had leaped forward academically, influencing universities nationwide and earning him honorary degrees. Political whispers grew. Democratic leaders noted his administrative skill and progressive rhetoric as assets for large arenas. Wilson's ascent at Princeton marked his transition from thinker to doer. Academia had been his training ground for ideas, now power revealed both visionary resolve and emerging floss rigidity and moral certainty that would soon spark fierce battles over the university's soul. Chapter 7: Reform and Resistance, Battles Within the University. Woodrow Wilson's Princeton presidency shifted from triumph to turmoil, as deeper reforms provoked entrenched interests and revealed his uncompromising nature. His greatest foes became the exclusive upper-class eating clubs, which controlled social life, marginalized non-members, and perpetuated privilege he saw as anti-democratic. In 1907, he proposed the Quad Plan, residential quadrangles integrating freshmen through seniors, with faculty masters overseeing intellectual and social life. Clubs would wither naturally, merit and community would prevail. Faculty endorsed enthusiastically. Students split along class lines, but wealthy alumni erupted in fury. Clubs were sacred traditions funding athletics, fostering loyalty and maintaining social hierarchy. Wilson campaigned fiercely, touring alumni groups across the East with moral appeals. Princeton must serve the nation and democracy, not perpetuate privilege. He framed the fight as an ethical imperative, invoking Christian duty and American ideals. Opposition coalesced around Andrew Fleming West, ambitious dean of the graduate school, with his own Vision of elite isolation. A massive bequest from alumnus Isaac Wyman intensified conflict. Millions earmarked for graduate facilities, but the location was contested bitterly. Wilson wanted the graduate collegiate be centrally integrated on the main campus, fostering unity between undergraduates and graduates in a shared intellectual community. West demanded isolation on the remote Merwick estate, envisioning an Oxford-style cloister under his personal control. Donor William Proctor, serial magnate, sided decisively with West, offering matching funds that dwarfed university resources. Battles raged publicly in newspapers, pamphlets, and heated board meetings. Wilson accused opponents of class interest and selfishness. Critics painted him authoritarian, inflexible, and disrespectful of tradition. Alumni withheld gifts. Board divided along reform lines. In 1910, Proctor's massive bequest went to West's. Plan after Wilson's concessions failed amid acrimony. Defeated and embittered, Wilson withdrew the Quad Plan, suffering his first major political loss. The fights exposed Wilson's stubbornness. He refused to compromise, demonizing foes as obstructing divine progress rather than negotiating differences. Yet they burnished his national image as a progressive warrior against entrenched privilege. Newspapers covered the drama extensively. Democratic operatives in New Jersey noted his eloquence, moral fire, and ability to rally public opinion. Personally draining. The controversies coincided with health strains and Ellen's declining strength. She battled kidney disease quietly while supporting him unwaveringly. Wilson confided despair to his diaries, feeling Providence tested him through adversity, yet strengthening his resolve. Resignation loomed as an option, but politics intervened dramatically. New Jersey Democratic bosses, seeking a respectable candidate to counter corruption scandals and appeal to reformers, approached Wilson in 1910. Bitter from Princeton defeats yet energized by national acclaim, he accepted the governorship nomination, launching his unlikely political career. With lessons from university battles, moral appeals could mobilize support, but inflexibility risked defeat. Princeton's battles forged Wilson politically. Resistance honed his public advocacy and resilience. Scars from personalizing conflict would mark future struggles. The university reformer emerged ready for the State House arena, carrying both vision and rigidity into public life. Chapter 8. An unlikely politician entering public life. By 1910, Woodrow Wilson seemed permanently entrenched in academia, yet Princeton's bruising battles left him exhausted and open to new paths. New Jersey Democratic leaders, machine bosses like James Smith Jr. and George Harvey, needed a reformist facade fourth governorship to counter Republican dominance and recent corruption scandals. They eyed Wilson, famous scholar, eloquent speaker, untainted by politics, capable of attracting independent voters. Wilson hesitated long, consulting family, friends, and diaries. Ellen encouraged the leap, seeing it as a divine opportunity to apply ideas practically. Daughters were excited at the prospects of public life. He accepted nomination on explicit conditions: full independence from bosses and freedom to campaign. On reform, campaigning vigorously across industrial cities and rural towns, Wilson attacked corruption, corporate privilege, and machine rule, promising direct primaries, utility regulation, workers' rights, and clean government. His speech is moral, visionary, delivered with professorial authority and biblical cadence, drew huge crowds, and newspaper praise as a fresh voice. November election delivered landslide victory. Wilson swept all counties, capturing even Republican strongholds, stunning bosses who expected a controllable figure. Inaugurated in January 1911, he asserted autonomy immediately in private meetings. "You elected me governor, I owe you nothing," he told party leaders firmly. National progressives cheered enthusiastically. Theodore Roosevelt praised his independence. William Jennings Bryan endorsed him warmly as a true reformer. Wilson's leap from classroom to Capitol embodied progressive era ideals: expert leadership, cleansing democracy from machine rule, and corporate influence through moral governance. Personally, the shift invigorated after Princeton's defeats. Trenton's State House bustle contrasted with Princeton's Ivy calm. Ellen adapted gracefully, hosting despite worsening illness and offering wise counsel on speeches. Wilson worked tirelessly, drafting bills personally and studying legislative procedure late into nights with intense focus. His rapid rise reflected perfect timing. Industrial unrest, trust scandals, and insurgent reform demanded intellectual honesty amid Gilded Age excesses. Wilson offered moral clarity government as an ethical force serving the common good, rather than special interests resonating with voters tired of bossism. Yet inexperience showed in early stumbles. He navigated the legislature skillfully through persuasion and public pressure, but faced personalized opposition, traits carried from Princeton fights. Success depended on public appeals bypassing machines, a strategy that proved remarkably effective. Wilson's political entry was improbable, no prior elected office. Southern Democrat in a northern industrial state with immigrant populations. Yet oratory, timing, reformist reputation, and moral framing propelled him forward decisively. The unlikely politician had arrived, ready to experiment boldly as governor and demonstrate scholarly ideas in practical action. Chapter 9. Governor of New Jersey, Progressive Experiments. Woodrow Wilson's governorship 1911-1913 showcased progressive governance at its most effective and transformative. Defying bosses who nominated him, I'm expecting compliance. He forged a legislative coalition of reformers, independents, and reluctant regulars, enacting sweeping measures in mere months that made New Jersey a national model. Key reforms included direct primaries replacing corrupt convention nominations, a powerful public utilities commission regulating rates and service to curb monopolies, workers' compensation mandating employer liability for injuries without fault, the Corrupt Practices Act limiting campaign spending and requiring disclosure, education improvements strengthened public schools, jury reform modernized trials, factory safety laws protected laborers from exploitation. Wilson bypassed machines masterfully, appealing directly to the public and lawmakers through speeches, newspaper interviews, and moral rhetoric. Government serving the common good over private gain. When bosses blocked bills, he toured the state, rallying public opinion through fiery addresses, forcing legislative capitulation under pressure. National acclaim surged rapidly. Magazines dubbed New Jersey the laboratory of progressivism, proving government could tackle industrial problems effectively. Wilson emerged leading Democratic contender for the 1912 presidency, praised by reformers nationwide as an honest executive. Compromises tempered idealism. He avoided radical labor positions, like mandatory union recognition, balancing business and workers to maintain broad support and avoid veto overrides. Yet results dramatically transformed the state: cleaner elections, fairer economy, stronger protections for ordinary citizens against corporate power. Personally demanding. The relentless pace strained health with digestive issues recurring amid stress. Ellen's condition worsened from kidney disease. She accompanied sparingly yet remained a steadfast advisor, reviewing speeches and offering emotional support. Wilson relied on aides like Joseph Tumulty for political savvy and grassroots organization. Success derived from scholarly habits applied practically, systematic preparation, clear vision, public education through explanation. He treated the governorship as a bully pulpit, detailing reforms in accessible speeches that built popular mandate and pressured legislators. By 1912, Wilson stood transformed, proven executive with national stature and legislative record validating his philosophy. Active government guiding progress organically could achieve tangible justice without revolution or class war. The governor's triumphs propelled him toward White House, proving academic ideas could become practical action on a grand scale and establishing him as a progressive standard-bearer against both conservatism and radicalism. Chapter 10. The Road to the White House. The 1912 presidential race fractured. Republicans dramatically, conservative incumbent William Howard Taft versus progressive former president Theodore Roosevelt's Independent Bull Moose Party. After a bitter convention fight, Democrats sensed a rare opportunity to reclaim the White House. Woodrow Wilson emerged as the frontrunner after New Jersey's triumphs demonstrated. executive ability and reform credentials. Convention. In Baltimore deadlocked 45. Ballots Southern and machine delegates backed. House Speaker Champ Clark until William Jennings. Bryan dramatically swung support to Wilson as a true progressive, untainted by conservatism or bossism. Nomination secured on 46th ballot amid jubilation. Wilson chose Indiana Governor Thomas Marshall as a balanced running mate appealing to the Midwest. The campaign sharply contrasted visions amid a three-way split. Wilson's new freedom emphasized individual opportunity against concentrated power, tariff reduction freeing consumers from protectionism, banking reform stabilizing finance, and antitrust enforcement dismantling monopolies while preserving competition. Roosevelt's new nationalism accepted large trusts under strong federal regulation and social welfare. Taft defended the status quo and high tariffs. Wilson campaigned tirelessly extensive whistle-stop tours through key states, eloquent addresses framing the election as a moral choice between privilege and the people. He attacked the triple wall of privilege, protective tariffs enriching corporations, the banking system serving Wall Street, and trusts stifling opportunity for average Americans. The October assassination attempt on Roosevelt in Milwaukee shifted sympathy toward the Bull Moose campaign, but the split Republican vote decisively aided Wilson. November results: Wilson for 135 electoral votes with 41.8% popular vote, the largest plurality since 1860, Roosevelt 88. Taft mere 8 in the worst incumbent defeat ever. Victory made Wilson the first Southern president since 1848, the second Democrat since the Civil War. At 56, the former professor prepared to redefine executive leadership on the national stage. With moral vision, personally bittersweet, Ellen's health failed rapidly from Bright's disease. She died in August 1914 in White House after devoted service, devastating him deeply into mourning. Daughters and close aides sustained him through grief and transition. The road to White House validated Wilson's extraordinary journey. Scholarly University president to reformer governor to national leader. His plurality mandate progressive yet moderate promise to transformative presidency, blending moral vision with practical reform amid industrial turmoil. Chapter 11. A professor as president, leadership redefined. Woodrow Wilson's inauguration on March 4, 1913, marked a historic shift, the first Southern-born president since Zachary Taylor, and only the second Democrat since the Civil War. At 56, the former professor brought scholarly habits to the White House: systematic schedules, meticulous preparation, and a conviction that leadership meant educating the public toward higher ideals. Through reasoned argument and moral persuasion, Wilson redefined the presidency as an active, interpretive force in American democracy. He revived the practice abandoned since Jefferson of addressing Congress personally, in dramatic appearances. His first message in April 1913 urged tariff reform. The theatrical delivery riveted lawmakers and the nation, restoring direct presidential congressional dialogue. Regular press conferences twice weekly at first made him accessible to journalists, though he grew impatient with probing questions and eventually curtailed them sharply. He treated the office as bully pulpit, Theodore Roosevelt's phrase, but with a professorial twist, explaining policy in moral terms, appealing to principle over partisanship, and educating public opinion. Cabinet meetings became seminars. He demanded informed discussion and absolute loyalty. Party leadership strengthened decisively. Wilson coerced Democratic congressmen through patronage, public pressure, and personal persuasion. Early months showcased commanding style and legislative mastery. The Underwood Tariff 1913 slashed rates dramatically and introduced progressive income tax, fulfilling campaign pledges amid intense lobbying battles. From protected industries, banking reform followed swiftly through skillful mediation. Wilson's moral framing, government serving people, not privilege, galvanized support and unified fractious Democrats. Personally tragic, Ellen Wilson died August 6, 1914, from kidney disease after devoted White House service advancing social causes. Devastated, Wilson sank into profound grief bordering despair. His daughters nursed him emotionally, Courtship and marriage to Edith Bolingbroke in December 1915 revived spirits remarkably, providing a vital partnership for remaining challenges. Foreign crises tested a new leadership style. Mexican Revolution 1913 to 1914 prompted interventions Veracruz occupation, guided by Wilson's belief in fostering constitutional democracy abroad without territorial gain. He refused European-style imperialism, declaring America would teach self-government through example and moral influence. Wilson's style blended idealism and control. He personalized loyalty intensely, resenting dissenters' betrayal of a higher purpose. Yet innovation endured. Modern presidency is national voice, shaping opinion through rhetoric and direct engagement with Congress and the public. The professor-president had arrived, transforming executive power into an instrument of progressive vision, and preparing for greater tests ahead in domestic reform and gathering global storm. Chapter 12: Progressive Reforms and Domestic Transformation. Wilson's first term delivered the new freedom agenda with remarkable speed and legislative mastery, reshaping the American economy and expanding government's role in the pursuit of fairness and opportunity. The Underwood-Simmons Tariff October 1913 cut duties sharply from an average 40% to 25%, ending decades of high protectionism, enriching trusts, and levied graduated income tax 1 to 6%. Enabled by the 16th Amendment, revenue shifted from regressive tariffs to progressivity, aiding consumers while weakening special interests. Banking chaos from recurring panics prompted the Federal Reserve Act December 1913. Wilson mediated brilliantly between conservative bankers and progressive reformers, creating a decentralized yet coordinated system. 12 regional banks overseen by a federal board, appointed by the president. It provided elastic currency, supervised member banks, and stabilized finance, an enduring cornerstone of modern monetary policy still functioning today. Antitrust measures were followed aggressively. Federal Trade Commission 1914 monitored unfair business practices with cease and desist powers. The Clayton Act 1914 strengthened the Sherman Act by exempting unions from prosecution and curbing interlocking directorates. Labor gained further. An 8-hour day for railroad workers, Adamson Act. 1916, Child Labor Restrictions, Keating-Owen Act. 1916, later struck down by the court. And workers' compensation for federal employees. Wilson appointed Louis Brandeis, brilliant reformer and first Jewish justice, to the Supreme Court 1916, signaling progressive commitment despite fierce Senate opposition from conservatives. Farm credits expanded through the Federal Farm Loan Act. Rural infrastructure improved with federal road funding. Reforms expanded federal power for economic justice, while preserving competition. Wilson's deliberate balance against Rooseveltian big government regulation and trust acceptance. Moral rhetoric framed measures as a Christian duty to protect the weak from the strong and fulfill America's democratic promise. Success derived from Wilson's scholarly approach, systematic preparation, coalition building, and public education. Challenges darkened the record profoundly. Racial policies reflected Southern upbringing. Wilson allowed cabinet members to resegregate federal offices, demoting black employees. He screened Birth of a Nation 1915 at White House, praising artistry despite Klan glorification that fueled racial violence. NAACP protests highlighted tragic blindness to black suffering. Amid progressive triumphs for white workers, health and personal grief strained Wilson intensely. Yet Edith's support steadied him after their 1915 marriage. Re-election 1916 loomed amid gathering foreign turmoil and domestic divisions. Domestic transformation proved Wilson's extraordinary effectiveness. Scholars' ideas became enduring law, modernizing America for the industrial age and setting a progressive template that influenced the New Deal and beyond. Chapter 13: Neutrality Tested. America on the Brink of War. World War I erupted August 1914, catching America unprepared emotionally and militarily amid a strong isolationist tradition. Wilson proclaimed strict neutrality immediately, urging citizens to be impartial in thought and in action, difficult amid deep ethnic ties to belligerents, and massive economic stakes with allies. Allied sympathies grew steadily despite the official stance. Britain's naval blockade starved Germany while allowing US trade. Loans and munitions flowed eastward, tying American prosperity to Entente victory. German submarine warfare countered ruthlessly. Lusitanic May 1915 killed 1,198 civilians, including 128 Americans, provoking national outrage and demands for action. Wilson demanded accountability and cessation. Germany's Arabic Pledge 1915 temporarily eased tensions but revealed submarine threats' persistence. The preparedness debate bitterly divided the nation between pacifists and interventionists. Wilson initially opposed large military expansion but shifted gradually, endorsing moderate build-up by 1916 amid growing threats. The National Defense Act expanded the army significantly. The naval construction program accelerated dramatically. To match global powers, Sussex torpedo crisis spring 1916 sank another liner with Americans aboard, forcing a stronger German pledge restricting submarine warfare if America pressed Britain on. Blockade, which Wilson firmly refused as a secondary issue violating neutral rights. Closing parenthesis. Re-election campaign stressed peace achievements proudly. He kept us out of war. Narrow victory over Republican Charles Evans Hughes to 177 to 250 for electoral votes. 49.2% popular reflected women's suffrage in western states and progressive domestic appeal, carrying California by a slim 3,800 votes. Zimmerman. Telegram January 1917 intercepted German proposal allying Mexico against the U.S. with promises of lost territory inflamed public opinion irreparably. Unrestricted submarine warfare resumption February 1917 sank multiple American merchant ships, killing citizens and destroying property. Wilson agonized deeply in private conferences, an idealist committed to peace through reason. He sought peace without victory through mediation, but increasingly saw German militarism threatening democracy worldwide. April 2, 1917, he asked Congress for a war declaration in a solemn address. The world must be made safe for democracy, framing conflict as a moral crusade. Neutrality's end marked profound evolution from a professor advocating restraint and organic change to a leader embracing a moral crusade for liberal values against autocracy. Chapter 14, Into the Great War. Commander-in-Chief. On April 6, 1917, Congress declared war. America entered World War I as an associated power allied with the Entente. Wilson assumed commander-in-chief role with characteristic moral clarity, framing conflict as a crusade for democracy against autocracy, and war to end war through principled peace. Mobilization was massive and unprecedented in American history. The Selective Service Act 1917 drafted to 0.8 million men. Volunteers added to million more. Liberty bonds and victory bonds financed the effort through patriotic campaigns. Progressive taxes rose sharply on wealth. War Industries Board under Bernard Baruch coordinated production efficiently. The Food Administration led by Herbert Hoover conserved resources through voluntary Hooverizing and meatless days. Railroads temporarily nationalized for wartime efficiency. Fuel rationing imposed. Propaganda via the Committee on Public Information under George Creel sold war through posters, films, speeches, and 4-minute men, rallying public support enthusiastically. Dissent harshly suppressed amid patriotic fervor. Espionage Act 1917 and Sedition Act 1918. Jailed critics like Eugene Debs and restricted anti-war speech broadly. Vigilantism targeted German Americans and suspected radicals in a dark chapter. Militarily, Wilson deferred to professionals while setting a broad strategy of an independent American force. General John Pershing commanded the American Expeditionary Forces in France, insisting on a separate sector rather than amalgamation. Troops arrived spring of 1918. Bolstering sagging allies with fresh manpower and morale that proved decisive. Wilson positioned America as morally superior. No territorial annexations, No indemnities, only liberation and self-determination. His leadership unified a divided nation behind an idealistic purpose despite domestic costs. Personal toll mounted heavily. Edith managed White House social demands skillfully. Wilson worked exhaustively amid stress and health concerns. Influenza pandemic 1918 killed tens of thousands, including soldiers in crowded camps. Darkening victory's approach. Armistice, November 11, 1918. Vindicated enormous effort. German collapse followed American reinforcements, and Wilson's 14 points undermining enemy morale. Wilson's wartime executive expansion set lasting precedents. Presidential power in national crisis. Through coordination and moral framing, commander-in-chief role completed. Wilson's transformation, scholar became global statesman leading a moral crusade, with profound consequences. Chapter 15. Shaping the Peace, the 14 Points Vision. On January 8, 1918, Wilson addressed a joint session of Congress with the 14 Points, a visionary blueprint for lasting peace that captured global imagination and offered a liberal alternative to war's destruction. Open diplomacy without secret treaties, freedom of seas, removal of economic barriers, arms reduction, impartial colonial adjustments, self-determination for peoples, and a crowning 14th point, League of Nations to guarantee political independence and territorial integrity. Through collective security. Points directly countered Bolshevik calls for revolutionary class war, offering a democratic path rooted in justice and cooperation. They inspired occupied peoples across Europe and undermined the Central Powers' domestic will to continue fighting by promising a fair settlement. Wilson sought peace without victory, just a settlement based on principle, rather than vengeance or balance of power realpolitik that bred resentment. Points 6 to 13 addressed specific territorial adjustments evacuating occupied lands. Point 14 establishing a permanent international organization preventing future aggression. Vision reflected Wilson's deepest idealism, providence guiding history toward democracy, cooperation and moral order. He believed America, untainted by old-world imperialism and fresh with democratic energy, could lead the moral reconstruction of the international system. Allies reacted coolly at first. France under Clemenceau demanded security guarantees and reparations for devastation. Britain protected imperial interests and naval supremacy. Yet Wilson's rhetoric captured global imagination, making him a hero to millions yearning for a better world. After the slaughter, armistice terms incorporated 14 points as basis. Wilson sailed to Europe in December 1918, first sitting president to travel abroad, while an office determined to negotiate personally and secure lasting peace based on principles. 14 points elevated Wilson to world icon status, yet set the stage for painful compromise and eventual disappointment when pure idealism met the harsh realities of victors' demands. Chapter 16. Versailles and Disappointment. Dreams compromised. The Paris Peace Conference opened in January 1919 amid unprecedented adulation. Huge crowds cheered Wilson as savior of humanity upon arrival in Europe. He chaired personally, dominating big for negotiations alongside Clemenceau France, Lloyd George Britain, and Orlando Italy in exhausting sessions. Wilson prioritized the League of Nations covenant above all, working tirelessly to secure its inclusion in the final treaty as essential for future peace. He conceded elsewhere to achieve this priority. Harsh reparations imposed on Germany, significant territorial losses, and the infamous war guilt clause assigning sole responsibility. Self-determination principle applied unevenly. New states created in Eastern Europe from collapsed empires, but colonial territories became mandates under Allied administration, rather than immediate independence. The controversial Shantung concession to Japan angered China and liberals worldwide. Compromises gradually eroded the pure 14 points vision amid the victors' demands for security and punishment. Wilson justified concessions pragmatically, an imperfect peace better than none. The League would correct injustices over time through ongoing adjustment and moral pressure. Exhausting negotiations strained fragile health amid influenza recovery and intense pressure. Returning briefly to America in February 1919, he faced growing Senate opposition to League commitments threatening sovereignty. Nationwide till September-October 1919, defended the treaty passionately, 29 major speeches in 22 days across the country to rally public support. Physical collapse came in October in Wichita. A massive stroke crippled the left side, impaired vision, speech, and judgment severely. The Versailles Treaty was signed on June 28, 1919, without Wilson present due to his earlier return home, dreams heavily compromised by realpolitik. He returned broken physically yet unyielding in defense of handiwork, as best possible under the circumstances. Chapter 17, The League of Nations, Idealism versus Reality. The League of Nations embodied Wilson's highest ambition, an international body to prevent future wars through collective security, open diplomacy, and peaceful dispute resolution. The covenant, embedded in the Versailles Treaty, required member nations to respect territorial integrity, submit disputes to arbitration or inquiry, and act jointly against aggressors. Violating peace erased a revolutionary departure from the balance of power tradition. Back home, the Senate became a decisive battleground for ratification. Republican Majority Leader Henry Cabot Lodge led reservationists who demanded amendments, protecting American sovereignty, especially modifying Article 10's collective security obligations to require congressional approval before action. A smaller group of irreconcilables, like William Borer, opposed any international entanglement whatsoever on isolationist grounds. Wilson, severely weakened by a stroke yet fiercely defiant in spirit, refused any compromise that altered the covenant's moral core or binding force. He believed reservations would fatally gut the League's authority and encourage future aggression by signaling American unreliability to allies. From his sict, he directed Democratic senators to vote against Lodge's reservations as a betrayal of principle. Public campaign faltered due to health collapse. Edith and advisors tightly controlled access amid controversy. In November 1919 and again March 1920, the Senate rejected the treaty twice, first with reservations, then without sufficient votes. America never joined the League Wilson fought so hard to create, severely weakening the organization from the outset. Defeat crushed Wilson emotionally and physically. He watched helplessly as the League convened in 1920 in Geneva without U.S. participation and moral leadership. Isolationist sentiment, deep partisan bitterness, and Wilson's own intransigence combined fatally against ratification. Idealism collided painfully with political reality. Global leadership required domestic consensus that Wilson could not forge in an impaired state, and an uncompromising stance. The professor's purest vision died in the Senate chamber, haunting his final years. Chapter 18, Collapse of a Visionary, Illness and Isolation, the devastating stroke of October 2nd, 1919, struck Wilson down at the height of his treaty fight while touring the West to rally support. Partial paralysis confined him to bed. Vision impairment, emotional volatility, and cognitive difficulties followed. Physicians warned of permanent damage and advised complete rest. Yet Edith Wilson, physician Kerry Grayson, and close aides concealed full severity from the public, cabinet, and Congress to maintain the presidency. For the remaining 17 months, Edith acted as gatekeeper, deciding which matters reached the president, a controversial arrangement. Critics later dubbed petticoat government or stewardship, where she filtered documents and relayed decisions. Wilson signed a few bills, vetoed others bitterly, and withdrew into physical and emotional isolation from former vigor. The 1920 election became a de facto referendum on his leadership and League vision. Democrats nominated Ohio Governor James Cox with Franklin Roosevelt as running mate. Wilson privately dreamed of vindication through a solemn referendum on internationalism. Republicans under Warren Harding campaigned skillfully on return to normalcy, rejecting Wilsonian globalism and promising isolation. Harding's landslide victory buried Democratic hopes decisively. Lame duck and comprehensively defeated, Wilson left office in March 1921, physically frail and politically broken. He settled in a comfortable S Street home in Washington, attended devotedly by Edith. Brief public appearances continued sporadically. He practiced law nominally with a former secretary and wrote articles defending his record passionately. Health never fully recovered despite a gradual improvement in mobility and speech. On February 3, 1924, Wilson died at age 75 from further stroke complications. Massive crowds lined the funeral route. He was buried in Washington National Cathedral, the only president accorded that honor. The visionary's collapse was profoundly tragic. Body and dream failed together in parallel. 11th G nation turning decisively inward from global engagement, he championed with moral fervor. Chapter 19, A Divided Judgment, Praise, Criticism and Controversy. Woodrow Wilson's historical ranking remains sharply and persistently divided, reflecting the profound contradictions of his life and presidency. Admirers credit him with fundamentally modernizing the presidency, expanding federal economic oversight, and planting enduring seeds of global cooperation. The Federal Reserve System, progressive income tax, Federal Trade Commission, and labor protections stand as cornerstones of 20th century governance still functioning today. His wartime mobilization and 14 points inspired democratic movements worldwide and foreshadowed the United Nations collective security. Critics focus relentlessly on darker legacies that stain his record. He resegregated federal offices, demoted black employees, and endorsed Birth of a Nation racist portrayal in White House screening that fueled Klan revival. Civil liberties suffered severely under the Espionage and Sedition Acts. Thousands faced imprisonment for dissent. Amid patriotic hysteria, Versailles punitive terms wore guilt clause. Massive reparations are blamed by many historians for sowing economic chaos and resentment. Feeding World War Personal traits fuel ongoing debate. Visionary eloquence and moral clarity versus stubborn inflexibility. Righteous certainty versus authoritarian tendencies in suppressing opposition and personalizing conflict. Progressives hail domestic reforms advancing equity for white workers. Civil rights scholars condemn racial policies as a betrayal of democratic ideals. Recent scholarship highlights racial blind spots reflecting Southern upbringing, yet inflicting real harm on Black Americans, and health-driven misjudgments in final, impaired years that clouded decision-making and contributed to league failure. His intellectual journey from professor to world statesman remains singular and unique among presidents. Divided judgment reflects profound complexity, towering achievements inextricably shadowed by profound flaws, tragic failures, and moral contradictions that mirror America's own. Chapter 20, Legacy of a Scholar President, Ideas that Changed the World. Woodrow Wilson's legacy profoundly reshapes modern America and the global order in enduring, complex ways. He expanded the presidency into active, rhetorical leadership setting, a template for Franklin Roosevelt and successors through direct public appeals, strong executive initiative and moral framing of issues, Federal Reserve, progressive income tax, antitrust enforcement, and regulatory agencies form foundational elements of the administrative state, governing economic life and social welfare. Internationally, the League of Nations, though it failed, in practice due to American absence, directly shaped the United Nations structure and the collective security ideal that still guides global cooperation. Self-determination principle powerfully fueled decolonization movements across Asia and Africa after World War II. Wilsonian idealism underlies the liberal international order, promoting democracy, human rights, and cooperation against aggression. Progressive domestic reforms advanced economic justice, labor rights, and democratic accountability against the concentrated corporate power of the Gilded Age. His vision of America as a moral force in world affairs persists in foreign policy debates between internationalism and isolationism that continue today. Flaws significantly temper admiration and complicate assessment. Racial policies reflecting the era's prejudices yet inflicted lasting harm on Black Americans through federal resegregation. Inflexibility and moral absolutism doomed the greatest dreams like League, ratification, Health collapse amplifieth the tragic elements of the final years. Only the president who earned a PhD, Wilson, uniquely proved that ideas could wield transformative power when joined to political skill. Scholar-turned-statesman changed history fundamentally. Executive activism, international institutions, guided progressive evolution remain his enduring marks on the 20th century and beyond. For better and worse,